Hi, everybody.
Hi,
It's Miss Ryder.
and Miss Blair.
We're here for Algae Academy Day 2. Let's get started. So you guys have already set up your science notebook, right? You have your data table there and your pencil ready to go. Good job. And Miss Blair and I are going to show you how to set up the experiment for growing our algae. And for this day 2, we have 2 essential questions I'm going to be reading them to you, even if you can't see me. We're thinking about how quickly does algae grow, and we're thinking about how do we measure growth rate of algae. That's what we want to do, is we want to grow algae and figure out how quickly it grows. So notebook's ready to go. I'm going to show you right now the materials that we're going to be using. So I've got here a container of algae that I've been growing for the past few days. In this container, I have media. So this is what we're going to put the algae into, and it has some nutrients and things food, that's right, for the algae to grow. We'll put that in there too. These are called flasks, and each group has one. You can see that this is the flask for group number 1. And the cool thing about these flasks is they have a lid that has holes on the top so air can get in. Okay, so each group has their own flask. These are beakers. These glass containers are beakers. And I already have I have the media measured out for each group in different beakers. And this is called a pipette. And on this pipette, there is a part here that is graduated. So it has measurements in milliliters. And we can pull up into this area with this pipette, with this wheel.
Super cool.
We can pull up very specific amounts of liquids using this pipette.
Sucky stick.
This is a Secchi stick. And this is what we're gonna use to measure the mass of algae that's in your flask. It's gonna help us determine how many cells are in there, so we can measure today how many cells are in there in milligrams per liter, and then we'll measure in 2 days and see how much growth there is in your flask.
Falcon tube.
This is called a skirted falcon tube, and this is where we're gonna pour in some of what's in your flask and do our Secchi stick reading. Okay, I think that's it, right, Miss Blair?
Yep.
Okay. So here we go. In your data table, go ahead and, along with Miss Blair, go ahead and write today's date in your data table in your notebook.
5.
And that's on page 12 in your notebook. Now, according to the slideshow that we showed you in class, you need to go ahead and write your group number. Make sure you have the correct group number written in your data table. Okay? This video is going to show all of the measurements for all 3 groups. You need to pay attention to only write down the measurements for your group number, okay? All right, here we go. So let's go ahead and start with group number 1. Okay, if you're on group number 1, you need to write down information right now. If you're not on group number 1, you need to watch carefully and see what group number 1 is doing. You're still responsible for that information. So group 1, we're gonna start off with your flask. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And group 1, according to the data table in the slideshow, you guys are going to be using 50 milliliters of media. This you don't need to write down in your data table, but you can see I have 50 mils. And I'm going to go ahead and pour that into your flask. So 50 mils of media.
Media. Food. Who doesn't love food?
A little food. All right, and then that one's done for group 1. Group 1 needs their algae. So I'm going to take some of this algae. Let me mix it up a little bit. I'm going to pour it into this beaker so I can measure it a little more easily. All right. Move that out of the way. And I'm going to use the pipette to measure. So for group 1, let me make sure. Group 1 gets 50 milliliters of algae. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the pipette into the beaker of algae. I'm going to turn the wheel. to pull up some of the algae into the pipette.
Don't forget your units. Put your units, 50 milliliters.
The highest number is 10. And then I'll place that in there and turn the wheel the other way. There's 10. Do it 5 times.
Now, if we were in class, you would be doing this at your table right now with your group. Gosh, Miss Ryder, you're like a real scientist today.
30. I'm a phycologist.
That's right. You are a phycologist. You're somebody who studies algae.
40. And 50. Notice when I put the pipette in here, I do not touch the tip of the pipette into the media. All right, so I put 50 mils of algae into flask 1 with 50 mils of media. And now I'm gonna mix it 3 times, 2, 3. And then we're gonna set that down, and I'm gonna keep it near some indirect light for a couple of days, and we'll let that algae grow. So now we go to group 2. Here we go, group 2. Get ready if you are group 2. Here's your flask with the lid that's got the holes in it so air can get in. Group 2, the amount of media for group 2 is getting 70 milliliters of media. So more media.
Food.
70 mils, yep. Food for the algae.
Will you pour in the same amount, Miss Ryder?
No,
of algae?
It's a different amount. Oh, of algae? This group's gonna get, group 2 is gonna get 30 mils of algae. So here we go.
Why aren't we doing all the same amount?
We are doing different amounts to find out, to answer one of our essential questions. What will cause the algae to grow the best? There's 20 and 30. So I don't know if you recognized this, but put the lid on and mix it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So there we go for group 2. They had 70 milliliters of media and 30 milliliters of algae. So it's a total of 100 milliliters. You can see that both the flasks have the same amount of liquid in them, but it's a different ratio of media to algae. All right, let's go with group 3. There's flask 3. Group 3, get ready. Group 3, you have a different amount of media as well. Group 3 has 80 mils of media. So how much algae are we gonna add? Let's go ahead and put the media in.
I was gonna do the math, and that's 80.
And then we'll do 20 mils of algae for group 3. And a milliliter is a really small measurement of liquid. So there's 10 milliliters, and then here's the second 10 to make 20. All right, done with the pipette, done with the algae for now. Let's get the lid on group 3. 1, 2, and 3. All right.
So before we move on, let's just make sure the blue is group 1. You had 50 milliliters written down in your notebook. Group 2, you're the black pen here. You had 30 milliliters of algae in your flask written down in your data table. In group 3, you're the green, and you had 20 milliliters of algae in the flask.
All right.
Make sure you have that written down in your notebook, please.
So you can see the colors, you can see that they're slightly different. And now what we're gonna do is do something called a Secchi stick reading. This is a Secchi stick. It's named after a person who, that's his last name. And there's a part at the bottom of this, the folded part, it's a target. And I'll show you how we're gonna use that to measure in millimeters the level of liquid in there. And then we're gonna convert that to find out how many cells of algae are in your culture. So I'm gonna take the falcon tube. I'll start with group 1. And I'm gonna pour some of group 1's algae and media mixture into the falcon tube. I'm gonna go ahead and pour it all the way to the top line. And then I'll make sure I close this. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the Secchi stick into the falcon tube and I'm gonna look down until this target disappears, right? It's going into this tube, and right when it's at the top, I can still see the target. But as it gets deeper and deeper into the tube, eventually I can't see that target anymore.
The black and white look the same.
And then I'm gonna record what number the top water line is on. So for group 1, your Secchi stick reading is, let's see, ooh, I think it's 45. Yep, at 45, I can't see the target anymore. So group 1 is 45.
So in your notebook, group 1, write down 45 millimeters. So don't forget your units.
And we'll pour that back in so that algae can keep growing.
All right, group 1, 50 milliliters of algae, and we had 45 millimeters on our Secchi stick. That was our reading. Now we're on to group 2.
Group 2, same procedure. Taking some of your algae and media from your flask, putting it into the falcon tube, placing the Secchi stick right down in there. I'm gonna look straight down and see at what number does the target disappear. Theirs is 55. 55 milliliters. So it had to go down farther. The color is lighter.
That's right, you went deeper into that tube, didn't you, Mr. Ware?
Mm-hmm. Before that target disappeared.
Now, do you want to make a guess, group 3, what yours might be? You think it's going to be higher, less than 55, or more than 55?
So here's group 3, into the falcon tube.
Group 3, the green group today.
Remember, each group has a different amount of algae and media. All right, here we go. Putting the Secchi stick in. I'm looking down at the target. Ooh. Oh my gosh, it's almost 80. Let me see. Yeah, I think it's 80, Miss Blair. 80 millimeters.
80.
Yep.
Kind of stuck on the chair.
I'll pour that back.
80 millimeters.
The lid back on. Okay. I'll clean the falcon tube later, put the beakers, and we'll keep the algae, we'll put it in the sun in a little bit, but we're gonna keep going now.
Miss Ryder, they're not the same colors.
They're not, you're right. Should we talk about the difference in qualitative look of the algae? So on the data table here, there isn't room at the bottom for us to show you, but in your notebook you have room. So at the bottom of your data table, we want you to make a little bullet there, and we want you to describe your flask. So this is group 1. qualitatively, what color is it? Just in bullets, write it down. What color is it? And how would you describe that, like comparing it to something else? Is it as dark as a Christmas tree or is it lighter than a Christmas tree? Right? Is it as dark as grass or lighter? What does the color look like? We know it's kind of a greenish color.
Can I see through it?
Yeah.
Is it kind of transparent, translucent?
So that's group 1. Write that down beneath your data table. Here's group 2.
Down here.
Yours is also a greenish. But what can you compare it to when you describe it qualitatively? Okay. And then there's group 3. Yours is also a green, but look, describe it. Okay. And now when we look at all 3 of them, notice the difference in the colors. All right. So what you have at the top on your data table is, these are called quantitative observations. Quantitative from the word quantity, they're numbers. And then right at the bottom of your data table, you wrote a couple of words about the qualities or the qualitative observations of the algae in your flask, like the color and what you might compare it to.
So the numbers, quantitative numbers, quantity of something.
Now what we have to do is we need to take that Secchi stick reading and we're going to compare it to or use a chart. It's called the Algae Biomass Indicator. Now this is in the slideshow, but I'm going to show you how this works. Okay, let me bring it a little closer for you. All right, that's a little better. Okay, so when we look at your data table, we can see that group 1 had a Secchi stick reading of 45 millimeters. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at the algae biomass estimator. And I'm going to look for something that's close to 45. All right, I don't see 45, but I do see 40 and I see 50. So if a Secchi stick reading of 40 means that there's 130 milligrams per liter of algae in there. A Secchi stick reading of 50 means that there's a mass of 90 milligrams per liter of algae. But we have 45. So we have to go somewhere between 90 and 130. That's a difference of 40. So I think what I'm going to do, 45, it's going to be 90. It's going to be probably about 110. So Miss Blair, for group 1, the amount of algae biomass in the flask is 110 milligrams per liter.
Right.
Now we're going to go to group 2. Group 2, your Secchi stick reading was 55. And again, there isn't exactly a 55 here. There's a 50 and a 65. 50 was 90, 65 was 30. It's a difference of 60, so about 35. So it might be about 65. I'm estimating there because the biomass estimator doesn't have everything, and it is an estimator. So group 2, you have 65 milligrams per liter of algae in your flask. An estimator. And you can see up here, group 2 is somewhere between the K and the L, right? H-I-J-K, whoops, this would be L. Somewhere in here, really light colored. All right, finally, group 3, 80 millimeters. Oh my gosh, well 80 on here is a 0. So 80 is said to be 0. Now, I wouldn't say that yours was that clear, honestly. Yours isn't quite that clear, so we're gonna bump it up a little bit because you have more color in yours. And again, this is an estimator. Your color isn't quite clear, right? So let's at least bump it up to like 5, Miss Blair.
Okay.
Again, this is an estimator. It's helping us to estimate based on the Secchi stick reading what mass or what amount of algae are in there right now. Okay, so there's our data table.
Make sure you know what group you are. Don't get them confused. Group 1, you had 50 milliliters, 45 millimeters, and 110 milligrams per liter. Group 2, you had 30 milliliters of algae, 55 millimeters in your Secchi stick reading, and 65 milligrams per liter. And group 3, you had 20 milliliters, 80 millimeters in your Secchi stick reading, and only 5 grams of milligram per liter of algae biogrowth today, day 2.
Okay, that's it for today. Bye.